I dealt with the arguments for a second referendum a few videos back. I'm going to reiterate a bit of that here and also deal with the single most retarded suggestion I have yet seen on that subject. I've seen this in a few forms, but I recently saw it from Labour politician Liz Kendall, who I actually rate a bit, or at least rated a bit, evidently mistakenly so, as she was talking on an edition last week of Woman's Hour, otherwise known as the updated Daily Politics Live. Comes in two clips, two very short clips here. Here's the first one.
Even if we did get a general election, which is what we're voting for today, we would have to be clear in that about our approach. And I think it is right to say, to get us out of this hole, and because it's right in principle, because what is on offer now is so very different from what people were promised, is that the public needs to have that say, and that's what I'd like to see.
No, Liz, that is a red herring. What may be different, be it real or imaginary, has no bearing on the question. As it was put, leave or remain, put your tick beside either one as it was put to the people. If you try, as I said in that other video, if you try to retrospectively change the terms of the referendum contract, well, a politician can practically do anything they want. But if you do try and do that, expect to be held accountable. Expect potential trouble, for that matter. Now this is the really good bit.
So what would the question be?
It's to stay, it is a May's deal, a no deal, or to remain.
So three questions.
Some form of that.
Free choice.
This really should not need explaining, and I apologise for explaining it like a school teacher, but evidently it needs to be laid out there, so I will lay it out. What Liz wants is a three-question referendum. Thuswise, remain in the EU, leave the EU on WTO rules, or leave the EU with a deal negotiated between the EU and the UK. The original result was leave 52%, remain 48%. What I'm going to do here is substantially increase the leave vote, just to demonstrate how destructive it is to split the vote of one of the sides. Remain 40%, leave now 60%. Obviously a slam dunk. Now let's split the vote equally on both sides on the Remain side. Remain stays at 40% and leave is overall still 60%. Yay! But with leave split now into WTO and deal options, the individual leave options have 30% each, which means Remain, the losing side, on 40% wins. In order for one of the leave options to beat the Remain 40%, you need at least this, with, for example, the deal side on at least 41%, leaving just 19% for the other option, the WTO one in my example. Which means that, on the leave side, in order for a leave option to win, that option needs to take at least 2/3 of the votes, which is impossible and which would be what they would call democracy. You cannot split the side you want to lose into multiple options to ensure a win for the side you want to win and maintain any veneer of respectability or democracy. They almost certainly won't try it, in practical terms at least, but it's worth pointing out. Back to the general question of the second referendum, which will never happen, but it's worth making sure it never happens. I had some feedback from a Remainer, which was useful. It's good to see comments from people who agree with me, obviously, but to get comments from people who disagree with me shows us exactly what it is we have to deal with. I'm not going to quote the feedback word for word. I'm going to paraphrase it basically here in 4 quotes. The government is free to ignore the results if it wishes to. The referendum was purely advisory. Funnily enough, they didn't tell us that at the time. Funnily enough, they didn't say to us, well, if you vote Remain, that will be a definitive decision, but if you vote Leave, it will be advisory only. Funnily enough, they didn't try that. I wonder why not. Voters didn't understand the nature of the choice and so relied on the campaigns to tell them, campaigns which then exaggerated, lied, etc. This objection is not uncommon and it is a complete red herring. Voters did not know what they were voting for, because what they were required to vote for was to leave or to remain, to put a cross in one of those boxes. Voters knew exactly what they were voting for. It wasn't a question of, if you vote Remain, you don't need to know anything, but if you decide to vote for Leave, you must know everything. It doesn't work that way because that wouldn't be fair. The government, in its gross incompetence, has failed to deliver, so we should decide again. This is a non sequitur. Government incompetence was never a condition of the referendum. The only required governmental competence was the ability to legislate for Article 50, which they somehow managed to do. That was the only competence that was ever required of the government. But let's face it, we were sold a pig in a poke. It's not what it said on the tin. What it said on the tin was, should the United Kingdom remain a member of the European Union or leave the European Union? It really was that simple. The tin, the ballot paper, said remain or leave. That's all there was to it. This is a collection of objections from a Remainer, a paraphrasing of the objections. Somebody with about as much power as you've got, i.e. pretty much nothing, but it's an approximation of what we're hearing from the likes of Anna Soubry, Chukramuna, Heidi Allen, David Lammy, Liz Kendall, Dominic Grieve, etc. All those slippery snakes who are trying to squirm and wriggle and shake themselves free of the thing they fear more than anything else, losing. Which you can understand. A lot of these people, with the possible exceptions of the likes of Anna Soubry and Liz Kendall, will have sacrificed potentially more lucrative careers and fewer working hours in the name of being able to have what they want, power, the ability to not lose. And now that they face losing, they're going to do absolutely anything. They're going to pull absolutely any stroke for that not to happen. So we see the red herrings, we see the straw men. It was advisory. We're not hearing that one so much now, but we have heard it. No, it was never given as advisory. It was always definitive. The people didn't understand. The people weren't as clever as us. Well, actually, do you know what? Even if they weren't, there was absolutely no requirement for anyone to have the ability to do anything other than to somehow stagger into the voting booth and put a cross in a place that wouldn't spoil the ballot paper. That was the extent of the education that was required. The campaigns lied to us. Well, there was no requirement for anyone to listen to anything that anybody said at any point before the referendum. The government was incompetent. The government has shown as much competence as it needed to show in legislating for Article 50. That was the absolute sum total of the required competence. We want more democracy. Why don't you want a second referendum? More democracy is better than less democracy. What is there for you to fear? Ah, yes, but I suspect that your call for more democracy will absolutely end at the moment you win. At that point, your calls for more democracy, more referendums will end. Slippery eels trying to wriggle free of the humiliation of a loss. Make sure you hold them to account. Don't let them rewrite the rules.